Welcome to another episode of the Midnight Investigator, where we take another alternative look at moments in history. September the 11th, 2001. Amidst the tragic loss of the Twin Towers, a third skyscraper fell in Lower Manhattan, World Trade Center Building 7. Its collapse just hours after the main towers became one of the most persistent and debated controversies of the 9/11 attacks. World Trade Center 7 was a 47-story high-rise tower block located just north of the Twin Towers. Completed in 1987, it was an integral part of the World Trade Center complex, built over a Con Edison power substation. The building housed a mix of private corporations and important government agencies, including the Secret Service, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the CIA, and more importantly, New York City's Office of Emergency Management. On the morning of 9/11, when the North Tower collapsed at 10:28 a.m., it sent a torrent of heavy debris crashing into the south face of Building 7, nearly 400 feet away. This impact gouged out a large section of the building and ignited fires on multiple floors. Crucially, the city's water mains had been severely damaged during the morning's events, rendering the building's sprinkler systems useless. For nearly 7 hours, these fires burned completely unchecked. Thankfully, Building 7 had already been evacuated earlier in the day, after the attacks on the Twin Towers. So the building wasn't empty by design, it was cleared hours before the collapse for safety. Later that afternoon, as the fires raged, firefighters on the ground noticed visible signs that Building 7 was structurally unstable. Recognizing the immense danger, they made the critical decision to pull back and establish a safety perimeter, clearing the area of all personnel. At approximately 5:20 p.m., the inevitable happened. After burning for almost 7 hours, World Trade Center 7 began to collapse. A small penthouse structure on the roof was seen to fall first. Seconds later, the entire building gave way, descending straight down into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. Because of the earlier evacuation, no lives were lost in its collapse. It became the first steel-framed skyscraper in history to collapse primarily due to fire. The sheer speed and symmetry of the collapse immediately raised questions. How could a modern steel skyscraper fall like that? In the years that followed, Building 7 became a central pillar for 9/11 conspiracy theories. The official investigation, led by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, would take years to complete. So what did they find? When the final report was released in 2008, the conclusion was definitive. Building 7 fell due to uncontrolled fires. The investigation identified a specific sequence of events. The fires, fed by ordinary office furnishings, burned for hours, weakening the steel floor beams and girders. As the steel heated up, it expanded, pushing a key girder off its seat. This led to the failure of a critical support column, Column 79. Once this column buckled, it triggered a progressive collapse. Floor after floor gave way in a chain reaction, and the rest of the building's interior structure came down with it. The investigators explicitly looked for and ruled out evidence of a controlled demolition. They found no indication of explosives. A key piece of evidence is the sound or lack thereof. Demolitions using explosives create an incredibly loud boom, estimated to be around 130 decibels from half a mile away. No such sound was recorded on any audio or video from that afternoon, nor was it reported by any of the hundreds of firefighters and witnesses nearby. What people heard was the rumbling sound of the building itself coming down. The collapse was dramatic, but relatively quiet, consistent with a structural failure, not an explosion. But what about the theories? One of the most common claims is that the collapse looked exactly like a professional implosion. While the visual is compelling, the mechanics are different. A controlled demolition typically starts from the bottom, severing columns to make the building fall. Building 7's collapse started from within on the lower floors. The sinking of the rooftop penthouse, visible in videos, is the key clue. It shows that the building's core failed first. Without its internal support, the exterior shell essentially peeled away and fell straight down. It looked symmetrical because, once the core was gone, gravity pulled everything downward uniformly. Another point of contention is a brief period of free-fall acceleration that investigators themselves confirmed. For about 2.25 seconds, the building fell at the speed of gravity. Conspiracy theories seize on this, arguing it proves all support columns were removed simultaneously by explosives. However, investigators explained this is exactly what you would expect to see after the internal structure had already failed. For that short moment, the upper section of the building had nothing beneath it. So it fell freely until it met the resistance of the debris pile forming below, which then slowed its descent. This brief free fall is part of the progressive collapse sequence, not proof of demolition. And what about other evidence like the famous Larry Silverstein quote? In a 2002 interview, the leaseholder of Building 7 said that after speaking with the New York City Fire Department, maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. Some people took pull it to mean a demolition order. But Silverstein later said he meant pull the firefighters out for safety. That's also how firefighters use the phrase. And with crews already worried the building was unstable, that explanation fits the situation on the day. Then there's the bizarre case of news outlets reporting the collapse before it happened. Most famously, the BBC announced Building 7 had fallen about 20 minutes early, while the building was still standing in the background of their live shot. This seems suspicious, but the explanation is far more mundane: chaos and miscommunication. On 9/11, information was flying. Fire department chiefs on the ground knew the building was on the verge of collapse and relayed that information upward. Somewhere along the chain, a report that it was likely to fall was misinterpreted as it had fallen. The BBC received this faulty information from a newswire service and reported it. It was a mistake made under extreme pressure, not a sign of foreknowledge. Finally, there's the motive. Some theories suggest Building 7 was destroyed to eliminate sensitive files for the CIA and other agencies. While it's true that countless documents were lost, there has never been any credible evidence or whistleblower testimony to suggest this was anything but collateral damage. The simplest explanation is that the files were destroyed because the building collapsed, not that the building was collapsed to destroy the files. In conclusion, when you examine all the available evidence, the story of World Trade Center 7 becomes clear. The damage from the North Tower's collapse, combined with uncontrolled fires burning for hours, led to a unique, fire-induced progressive collapse. The theories that surround it, while compelling at first glance, are based on misunderstandings of physics, misinterpretations of quotes, and the general confusion of that terrible day. What seemed mysterious has been thoroughly investigated and explained by science. The fall of Building 7 was not a secret plot, but a tragic consequence of the events of 9/11. Okay, so we've heard in depth about the plausible reasons Building 7 collapsed. And let's face it, that's the official story. It's plausible, and it's backed up by science and engineering. But like it or not, these buildings were designed with fire safety in mind, and the Twin Towers were built with the idea that a major accident was possible. So the question people keep coming back to is simple: what went wrong? It's very easy to debunk conspiracy theories, because that's what everyone eventually does. But once you do that, it puts people into a bracket of their own. It labels them, dismisses them, and shuts the conversation down. Okay, so let's be clear here. The majority of conspiracy theorists are not being disrespectful. If it looks like a controlled demolition and that's what they think it is because something doesn't look right, they're trying to make sense of something that still doesn't feel fully explained in plain language. That's not mockery. That's a search for answers, and it deserves calm, amicable debate. Now, the majority accept that the buildings were hit by aircraft. That's a fact. They accept the aviation fuel, the fires, and the scale of the impact. And yes, it's plausible that this could lead to structural failure, which is why government reports and inquiries exist in the first place. That's not what they're saying. But what they're suggesting is darker. They believe 9/11 could have been planned, and that these buildings were destined to fall regardless, that the controlled explosion idea is part of a make sure it happens plan. A guarantee. And once you go down that path, you open all kinds of questions. Some will be nonsense, some will be misunderstanding. But before we dismiss it, look at the sequence of events because this is where suspicion grows. At 8:46 a.m., Flight 11 hits the North Tower, and by 8:50 a.m. the fire department is arriving. At 9:03 a.m. the South Tower is hit. Then, at around 9:45 a.m., the Office of Emergency Management orders the evacuation of Building 7. Reports suggest the building is already nearly empty. Remember, the Office of Emergency Management operates from inside Building 7. At 9:59, the South Tower collapses, causing widespread panic. At 10:28, the North Tower collapses, and its debris damages Building 7, and fires begin to take hold. By around 2:30 p.m., the fire department withdraws and keeps a distance from Building 7. And then at 5:20 p.m., Building 7 collapses. So conspiracy theorists ask a simple question. If a formal evacuation order comes at around 9:45, But the building is already nearly empty. Is that just common sense? Or is it prior knowledge? Then we have the BBC report, and this is where it gets uncomfortable. On air, the BBC said, "We've got some news coming in. The Salomon Brothers building in New York has also collapsed." Building 7 was often referred to as the Salomon Brothers building, named after a major tenant. Then, minutes later, the point is reinforced again. "You might have heard. I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has." Okay, not once, but twice the collapse is confirmed as fact. The only problem is, the building hadn't collapsed yet. The report goes out at around 4:54 p.m. EDT, and Building 7 collapses at around 5:20 p.m. That's roughly 26 minutes early. Now, to be fair, there were premature and conflicting reports across multiple networks that day. The scene was chaos, communications were unreliable, smoke and dust blocked views. But here's the point conspiracy theorists don't let go of. Broadcasters were effectively verifying the collapse of a building before it had collapsed, and they obviously got that information from somewhere. That's why some people argue it suggests a script was in motion. The BBC didn't publicly tackle this mistake until 2007. That's a long delay, especially when this exact moment helped ignite one of the biggest conspiracy theories. And blaming smoke and dust doesn't really fit because the building was clearly visible behind the reporter, as the words were said. So do we call it chaos, or do we call it bad journalism? And then we get to the demolition claim. Let's be brutally honest. A lot of this ends up relying on eyewitness impressions and what people think they saw or heard on a day where everything was noise, confusion, and collapse. So for many people, it boils down to one thing, the visual. And to the untrained eye, Building 7's collapse looks like a controlled demolition. So why wouldn't people think that, especially when the world's press had already told them it had collapsed around 20 minutes earlier? So where does that leave us? With an official explanation that may be technically sound, and public doubt that didn't come from nowhere. And one thing is clear, you can't settle this properly in a 10-minute video. It needs deeper investigation, original sources, and a calm look at what was known and how information moved that day. If you want that full deep dive, subscribe and we'll go further. For now, the jury's still out on this one. Was it all part of something bigger? Does the investigation solve the problem? Or did irresponsible journalism fuel the conspiracy? Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. You've been watching the Midnight Investigator. If this interests you, please like and subscribe. We will be back for more investigations. In the meantime, question everything. Don't let someone else do your thinking.